writer who enjoys farming, plotting to overthrow the government, and long walks on the beach. Sometimes for days on end. Reading from his untitled story based on the Ashtabula County, this excerpt takes place following the hurricane which hit Manhattan in the fall of 2012.
Chapter 5. He awoke to the sounds of morning birds and was full of praise. He opened the door to let the light in. Everything was still wet, sun glistening off the puddles. Everything felt renewed, restored, and returned to the void and reborn. He breathed in deep. Morning air, reminiscent of spring following the final thaw. He performed his whole practice of yoga poses while the coffee percolated. He made pancakes and shared them with the dog. He prepared a small day pack with 2 bottles of water, a portion of dried fruit, a rain poncho in case the sky loosed its falling wrath once more, his freshly sharpened knives, some clothesline, a battery headlamp for coming back in the dark. Guessing the time to be in the 9 o'clock hour, he fastened the dog to a run and headed south into the wood. At the ravine, the river was higher than he had imagined. Rushing waters splashed up and over the makeshift log bridge. He had another day to wait for the waters to recede. Stepping carefully onto the slick and saturated logs, he shuffled slowly. Having nearly crossed, and already done so in his mind, he slipped and went down hard and quick on his hands. He saved himself from taking a plunge, only soaking his knees in the cuffs of his sleeves. He crawled in this way on the muddy bank and looked back over his troubled crossing. He proceeded on, through the forest, to that beautiful maple grove with its tall, smooth-barked sentinels. The light came down brightly through the bare limbs above, over rare leaves, to the colorful yet sodden earth below. Through this he traversed, past the rusting farm equipment and its chaotic old overgrowth, past the empty husk of the riding truck, from the trees to the briar field. Once clear the tangled acres, he saw the old barn, and the new loss of shingles from the roof. He greeted the chickens in their pen with mimicry at their balking sounds, continuing on to the peeling farmhouse. He reached the back and ascended the weathered stone steps. He knocked hard on the wooden door, making the small square windows rattle. Through the streaked panes, he saw the old man approach, mug in hand, the same flannel shirt as last time. This time, when he opened the door, he invited the younger man in. Inside, the place was well ordered, but the thickness of dust on the lamps and shelves, the dark smudges on the doors and archways, these all suggested it had long forgotten a woman's touch, or any call to urgency about appearances. He noticed the floor was well swept, and reasoned this to be a loosening activity for his arthritis. The old man poured him a cup of coffee without asking, and the two sat at a large table of solid vintage craftsmanship. At the far end of the table was a pile of officious letters and grocery circulars. The walls were a faded marigold, flaked away in places where the plaster crumbled, revealing the 100-year-old horsehair which bound it together. A dust and cobweb covered crucifix rested above the arch of what was decided to be the head of the room. An old rotary phone hung on the wall, surrounded by a dark halo of handprints. Below it, a simple wooden chair and a small square table supporting an electric lamp and a sorely abused phone book. A single picture hung on an empty wall. Inside the beveled wood frame was a much younger version of the old man with a full head of dark hair. The face displayed a sternness which seemed lost now in his faded eyes and sloughing skin. With him in the photo, before a studio backdrop of an autumn scene, was a short, plump woman of timeless attraction, a gold cross nestled in her bosom. He looked back to the old man, who had been watching him inspect the picture silently. "Your wife was very beautiful." The old man smiled, nodding his head slightly, then looked down into his coffee. The younger sipped from his as well. Coffee was much better than his own, rich and full-bodied. "Good coffee," the younger added to break the silence. "You know," the old man picked up, "they say coffee could go extinct this century. Coffee, you'd never think it." Now as the younger stared into his cup, and the pair returned to silence in their thoughts. "How'd you hold up to that storm out there? She sure was blowing." That she was. No trees came down on my head, and that's about all I could ask for. The tough part was the cabin fever. Spent an afternoon fishing in the rain just to get out of the hut. Catch anything? Little trout. Not much to look at, but it sure tasted good, like the river. This brought a big, crooked, toothed grin to the old man's maw. Any news from New York? I've been thinking about this woman in Jersey City. Not much I'd call news, just a lot of pictures showing that it's all still there, just a little worse for it. Death toll is only about 50 in a million. Chances are your friend is just fine. Then they heard the creaking complaints of the old staircase. A young man, early 20s, with shaggy blonde hair shaved to the sides, passed through the room without looking up from a tiny glowing screen. From the archway to the kitchen, he could be seen taking juice from the fridge and drinking it from the carton. "Benji, say hello. This fella's gonna work on the stuff I've been on you all year for, seeing as you can't seem to be bothered with any of it." "Hey," the kid said without looking up, passing back through the room and heading up the stairs, creaking each step. "That kid's about as useless as art to a blind man." "Your grandson?" The old man nodded. "Well, those chickens aren't going to kill themselves." The younger stood up suddenly, surprisingly old. "You should find anything you need out in the barn. Keep 2 of them big boys for next year's batch. You can keep that old rooster for yourself. He might make a good soup, but the meat's too tough for anything else." The younger man finished his coffee in one gulp and headed for the door. He let himself out and crossed the yard, calling to the birds as he passed. At the barn, he pushed open the large, stubborn door. The light pierced the musty dark. Among the cluttered shelves and workbench, he collected a large pot and an old butcher block. He put these in a modern plastic wash tub and dragged it to the middle of the floor. In a corner, he found a metal cauldron and tripod. Leaving the tripod where it stood, he hefted the cauldron in both arms and duck-walked it to the stone fire pit outside. He returned for the tripod, then the wash tub. He gathered fallen sticks beneath the trees in the yard, split wood from a large stack near the house, and when he was done, lit a crackling fire. He set up the tripod and hung the cauldron. He walked to the spigot, turned it on, and returned with the hose crimped in his hand. He filled the cauldron, then the large pot, then the wash tub. As it overflowed, he returned to turn off the spigot. Near the pot, he placed the butcher block, the knives, 2 empty trash bags, and 1 smaller bag from the market. He threw the length of clothesline over a low branch of a nearby tree. He drew it to the proper height, tying the remaining slack around the trunk. From the dangling end, he tied a slip knot. When the work area was ready, he added wood to the fire and went to inspect the chickens. The roosters all had beautiful plumage, and already he was thinking about the art. He pushed out 2 rather easily as he would spare, a large barred rock with black and white reticulation down its long tail feathers. The other, jet black with green and purple iridescent, that seemed majestic even in the feeble sun bottom. He entered the rooster pen. The chickens protested and scattered. He blocked a group in a corner, picked a target, and quickly went for it. He connected between its wings and pushed it to the ground. He grabbed it by its legs, and as soon as it was upside down, it went falling quietly. He carried it out to the tree, lifted it up, and passed the knot. Gently, he let it hang. The bird staring straight down as it swayed. He picked up a combat knife with a curved blade and wrapped his left hand around its head, covering its eyes. With his right hand, he pressed the blade gently against its neck, into the spot beneath the jawbone, and sliced through the jugular. Dark blood ran out like hot, used motor oil down his bare arm. He sliced the other side and blood poured. When the flow slowed to a trickle, the bird went into its death spasms. Still he held its head. When the seizing stopped, he found a spot right between the vertebrae, severed the head, and let it fall. He put on a rawhide glove and dunked the headless corpse into the boiling cauldron, swabbing it around. Then he dunked it in the cool water. After that, the feathers came off easily, but it was still several minutes of plucking before it was ready for the cutting board. With a different knife, he sliced into the neck, pulling out the windpipe and food sac with a finger. Then he cut around the anus, reached inside, scooped out the intestines and organs with his bare hand. He saved the hearts and livers in the small market bag. He chopped off the feet and tossed the carcass in the wash tub. Now when he neared the pen, they went into a frenzy. He stepped inside. Their small panicked eyes studied him. He had become the Reaper, Death, the Nazi handler just following orders. He picked another target, moved in quick, and snatched it away. He strung it from the tree, placed the knife in its neck, and pulled without hesitation. This time he severed the windpipe. Immediately the cock began to twist and thrash, spattering the man's face with hot blood. He grabbed it as it swung in the air and ripped through the rest of its neck with the knife. The death was visceral and unsettling. He stripped and bagged the feathers, removed the guts, lopped off the feet, and tossed it in the wash bin. He picked a third rooster. This time when he killed it, he was slow, comforting, methodical. The bird died peacefully, was cleaned, and joined the other pale, bobbing bodies. He judged the average to be a quarter hour per bird. He continued on, taking only one break for water and dried apple slices. The boiling pot began to reek as the day progressed, and the flies crowded the bag of guts. The sky shifted to twilight as he hurried to clean everything up. He counted 20 chickens in the tub. He dumped the waterfront in the yard, which was now the pale pink of jailhouse Kool-Aid. He dragged the tub near the back of the house. He opened the door and poked his head in. "Hello?" He heard the rustling of a newspaper from an unknown room. The old man appeared in an archway. "Done for the day? I've got 20 cleaned and ready. I can do the rest tomorrow. Where do you want 'em?" "You can get 'em in that door there. I'll bag and freeze 'em tonight." The younger man hefted the tub and turned it at an awkward angle to fit through the door. The chicken shifted their dead weight inside. He placed it on the floor. The old man picked up one of the birds and inspected his work. He appeared pleased as he gazed into the empty cavity. "Do you think you could spare an onion? I'm planning to fix some livers for dinner." The old man tossed the bird back into the wash tub with a rubbery thud. "I'll get you one." He moved slowly into the kitchen. The younger man could hear the creak of a pantry door. Then the old man reappeared with a large yellow ball and handed it to him. He tucked it into his pack, and the two made their parting. In the yard, he tipped the wretched cauldron, extinguishing the fire in a noxious plume. He set the butcher block upon the rinse pot and shoved his knives in the small bag of delicacies into his pack. He took the sack of guts to a large trash can beside the house and sealed it away inside. He donned his headlamp and switched it on, contrasting the last light of the dying day. He shouldered the bag of feathers and made for the tractor path around the barn. He made the briars, holding the feathers high as he fought through the snags in the dark, feeling his flesh get scratched and torn beneath his clothes. He made the maple grove. The smooth white trunks appeared as ghosts in the light of his headlamp, stepping out from abyssal shadow. When the maples faded to wilder growth of the unplanned forest beyond, at the ravine the water still ran high, the crossing now made more perilous by the night. He placed one foot on a wet log, then another, and crept along. He faltered once in the middle of the river, but maintained and resteadied himself. His arms outstretched, the bag of feathers dangling recklessly, he made the other side and climbed out of the ravine. Honey barked at the disturbance until she heard his voice call her name. As he approached through the wood, her tail wagged excitedly and she emitted a succession of pitiful whines. He unhooked her from the run and entered the hoop house. Inside, he lit a kerosene lamp, switched the headlamp off, and stoked a fire in the stove. In this light, he could now see his clothes, streaked heavily with brown smears of old blood. The dog sniffed his legs insatiably. He tossed the bag of feathers beside the ruined rice and corn near the door. He dropped his pack beside the good food stores. He sat down on his bed with his face in his chapped hands and stayed that way. In his mind, the deaths of the chickens replayed in full detail. When he broke from this morbid trance, he took down the large iron skillet and dumped in the bag of wet hearts and livers. He sliced some of the onion, adding the white slivers to the dark meat. He slid the pan into the stove atop the coals and sat, occasionally flipping through the steaming contents with a fork. The room filled with the aroma. Once everything was nicely browned, he dished it out to himself and the dog. They sat together and ate in silence. The smoothness and rich taste of the livers compared to nothing else. The hearts had a tough rubbery texture, but ended in a satisfying burst as his bite pierced through. When the meal was finished, he stripped off his blood-stained garb and slipped heavily into his bed. Sleep came easily, but his wounds were frightful.